You only have so many PTO days, but that scratchy throat just keeps hanging on. We'll tell you about a new trend called disease concealment. It is 3:11 on your Friday. You wake up with a scratchy throat, a slight fever, but you've got an important work meeting you've been preparing for weeks. Do you call in sick or take a Tylenol and tough it out? New research shows many of us would choose to go to work, even if it puts our coworkers at risk of getting sick too. Javier Pérez is an attorney at law. He is here to share some insight on this. Javier, there's even a term for this. What's happening here?
Right. So the new term for something I think we're a little familiar with, unfortunately, is illness concealment, which is where people are sick and going to work and not telling anybody that they might be carrying something contagious.
Why is this happening?
There's a lot of theories, I think, in the surveyed questions about how frequently this is happening. People are saying they're worried about getting behind at work. They're worried about running out of their PTO or their vacation time. But kind of interestingly, they're also worried about how they're going to be perceived as not being like a team player or kind of pulling their weight among their coworkers.
It seemed after COVID, most people were more understanding of you're sick, stay home, we get it, don't get us sick situation. But people are still scared to call out, huh?
That's right. That's right. I think we all got sensitized to that because we want to spread COVID. But now that we're kind of all back up and running, I think people are really sensitive to, can I tough it out and get through it, but, are endangering their coworkers and maybe people that are medically vulnerable where, simple bug could really put them in harm's way.
Well, that brings us to, as we discuss this, I'm talking to a lawyer here. So what are our legal rights when it comes to calling out sick? And could there be legal ramifications if we get someone sick?
Right. No, absolutely. There's kind of a thorny area there because your rights to be accommodated really require an actual disability, which is generally something that lasts longer than 6 months. So if you have a cold or you have the flu, that's generally not going to qualify you to a legal right to sick leave. But if you have something where you're hospitalized, even if it is kind of a more common ailment, you still could request something like FMLA leave, but even that requires you to work there for at least a year and the employer to be big enough to qualify. As far as your kind of potential responsibility for getting somebody sick, as far as everything I've seen, it's really hard to prove you got it from X person. We saw that in COVID. It's next to impossible to say I got it that day from that person. So I think that risk is relatively low, but there's cases out there where people, knowingly have something like HIV and have kind of sexual encounters with people and actually are held criminally liable for spreading that knowingly.
Well, this is the part of the interview where I usually ask doctor's orders, but I'll ask best advice from attorney in this point.
Sure. So I think it's always the best policy if you think you're sick to let your supervisor know and maybe even defer that decision. If you can, get seen by a doctor and get them to tell you whether it's safe for you to go to work or not. I know I've taken advantage of kind of the teledoc, companies like MD Live, where you can get seen kind of around the clock virtually and just get some guidance about whether you're actually going to get somebody sick or not. And of course, if you have the option to work remotely, maybe that's an option for that day. If you feel like you can work, but you might be getting people sick, you go in. We do have more flexibility now that we've pivoted post-COVID.
Javier Pérez, attorney at law, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.